Congress and the American people need to hear what Prime Minister Netanyahu has to say about Iran's nuclear program. This according to former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who's currently visiting the country. The presumptive 2016 Republican presidential candidate told IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan that the discord over Netanyahu's upcoming address is due to internal U.S. politics and not anti-Israel sentiment.
He absolutely should go. And the reason is not for his sake, it's for America's sake. This may not be in his best interest. It's proved to be, unfortunately, and unnecessarily controversial. But his reason for going is not because this is good for his political situation. This is good for America to hear from the Israeli Prime Minister. Because in hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister, whoever it may be, we're hearing the voice of the leader of our closest friend, not just in the Middle East, but perhaps our closest real friend and ally in the world. And we need to know the perspective of those closer to Iran on what that threat really represents to Israel as well as to the United States. So I welcome his coming, and I look forward to what he will say, and I think the American people will benefit from his perspective.
But not all the senators and congressmen will hear him, some will avoid his speech. Is Israel becoming a bipartisan issue in Washington?
The internal politics of America, I think, are different than the support that Americans have for Israel. If some of the Democrats decide not to come, first of all, I'd be happy to take their seats. If they'd like to let me come and sit, I'd more than gladly occupy one of those chairs. But I don't think that this is in any way reflecting an attitude toward Israel. I believe it has all to do with the internal politics of the U.S. American people are very strong in their support of Israel, remain so.
What do you think of the White House's policy towards Iran?
I think it's naive to believe that you can sit down and reason with a rattlesnake. And we're dealing with a rattlesnake in Iran. We're not dealing with people who are rational. Anyone who denies the Holocaust, anyone who speaks of another nation, as Iran has of Israel, and they would like to be wiped off the face of the map, any nation, a state that would sponsor Hamas and Hezbollah and sponsor terrorism and sponsor the murder of innocent children and indiscriminate attacks upon civilized people, that is not a nation you sit down and negotiate with. You just don't. There's nothing to negotiate. So you do everything you can to put your boot on their neck, not to offer them a warm cup of soup. So what we're doing is boneheaded, in my view.
Do you think there's a growing Islamophobia in the United States?
When I hear that term, I always try to question what do you mean by Islamophobia? Because if you mean that we recognize the real threat that Islam and the radical versions of it pose to freedom all over the world, that's not Islamophobia, that's reality. What I worry about are the people who deny the clear and present threat that radical jihadism presents to the world, its balance of power, and to people who love freedom all over the place. When I think of, it's not Islamophobia to say we've got to stop people who would abduct, rape, and torture a bunch of little girls in the name of Boko Haram. It's not Islamophobia to say that it's wrong to cut off the heads of children because they're Christians and won't renounce Christ. It's not Islamophobia to say that there's something hideously wrong about going in and spraying bullets all over a Jewish delicatessen in Paris or murdering people who happen to draw some cartoons that you don't like. If that's Islamophobia, then we need more of it. What we need less of is this accommodation to evil. We need to call it what it is. You can't defeat an enemy if you don't recognize it, if you don't truly direct the light on it. And we'll never defeat jihadism if we don't understand what it's driven by.
The ceasefire